We've got our new Global Development Alliance that attempts to leverage private sector investment and does highly successfully. I've got 3 people working there. And so what I think we need to look at, and those of you who are grappling with future structures for U.S. foreign assistance, is whether we shouldn't have some much more fundamental transformation of the structures. If I had limitless resources, I would have within USAID very large entities looking at mobilizing the private sector investment, the foundation community, and of course, trade and foreign direct investment, because that's where the money is, right? And that's where the interactions are. And so I think there's a structure, other than me saying, you know, the truth, which is that we love the partnership we have. We need to look at how we've structured. I'm struck by the fact that we still are using terms like foreign aid, when here we're using terms like partnership and interaction. I mean, that's what we need to take this to the next generation. And I'm going to make a shameless pitch following up on what Henrietta said for resources, because one of the reasons we can't do this is that unlike the 11,000 aid officers we had during the Vietnam War and the 5,000 we had 20 years ago, we're now down to 2,200 officers, of whom about 1,100 are foreign service officers. We now have more military band members than we have U.S. foreign service officers overseas. Spread across 84 countries, you can do the math, 1,100 officers. So part of the answer to the question of how we do this partnership is, of course, to have enough people to actually hear the innovative ideas that are coming from the private sector, public and for-profit and not-for-profit, act on them, translate them into government programs, and that's a missing synapse in all this. I have one last observation I just want to share, a data point to this audience. I just read some World Bank studies about foreign direct investment and the trade and NGO involvement. And all of us, if we really care about reducing poverty and care about human progress, have got to pay attention to where the data really is and not generalize, because the numbers are great. Wow, foreign direct investment's really going up, so the answer's got to be, you know, trade and working with the private sector. But it's a highly segmented market. Certain countries are doing just great with the private sector, and certain other countries, it ain't happening yet. And so while we need to understand the vast potential of private sector partnerships, we owe it to desperately poor people to take a close look at that market and see where we really still need to do some government-to-government aid as well.
Lael, can I just make another comment? I think Mark and Jim and I are very much on the same page with regards to partnership and cooperation and interaction. But I think, as Jim has pointed out, we're on the verge of entering a new world of philanthropy. And it's not just Gates, Buffett, and other more established, older philanthropic private institutions. We really are on the verge of a new concept of what assistance is all about. We're not there yet. We're struggling to get there. It is not easy to partner. MCC has been rebuffed, and people aren't quite sure about us, and we're a government institution, so why is the government going out to private philanthropic organizations? Where we have had the greatest success, because of the nature of the private sector, is with the private sector. They're aggressive. They want to go out in the field. They want to make money. They see an opportunity. So they scramble faster, let's say, than other organizations, because they see an immediate reward. With Lesotho yesterday, with Mozambique in the previous week, we've had private sector outreach programs that were huge numbers, frankly. In the case of Lesotho, 100 people showed up. In Mozambique, 150 people showed up from the private sector to understand what the MCC is doing, to see what our programs were, to see what they could do to expand this assistance to these countries. And when we leave, because our MCC programs are finite in duration, they're 5 years, we want to achieve our objectives and our results within that 5-year period of time. When we leave successfully, we want the private sector to have been involved and to take over and to continue that economic development, which is what we're all about. But coordinating this partnership, this concept and reality of partnership, is not easy. We're getting there. We're on the verge of it. It's going to happen, because that is the only way that all of us are really going to be true to what we're trying to achieve.
Let me just ask one last question, which is a question from the audience. Each of you heads up your own organization. PEPFAR is a separate organization. The Coordinator for Reconstruction Stabilization, separate organization. No real reporting lines between you. What is the value of this existing separation between these organizations, and what's the cost? And if you were in the shoes of the next administration, whoever were trying to design this system, would you do anything to unite them, or do you think this is the right system to move forward with?
Set up a question.
From the audience? Handwritten?
It's a good question. The reason I'm hesitating is we could have a 3-day workshop, obviously, on that question. That was the point I was trying to make earlier about taking a look at some of the ways the military has done this. I don't think the answer to every organizational management question is let's put everybody into one big box and make it more hierarchical. In fact, I think most of the literature I read would suggest that more flexible, more agile management mechanisms in a very complex world and decentralized systems and more decentralized decision making would be the preferred management structure. So I think we need to manage smart, not necessarily manage big. We have plenty. Henrietta Fore sits on John's board. John sits at the Secretary of State's staff meeting every morning. And so I don't, despite the fact this may have been the first time that all three of them actually sat in the public stage, in fact, of course, they do talk all the time. I do believe that the military has really paid some serious attention, because they have the resources, to these kind of management structures. And there are some very interesting models out there that we ought to look at. This CRS issue is exactly the right way to go. Let's have a place when there is a crisis, a fast-moving crisis, where we know who's going to call the meeting, we know who in the U.S. government is going to come to the table, we know what resources they're going to bring, and we know what process will be used to allocate the resources. If you try to plan it much farther down than that, you'll always be one generation behind. As the old proverb goes, it'll be the generals fighting the last war. Let's not reorganize the government for the next Iraq or Afghanistan. Let's create flexible management structures that recognize the value added of diverse organizations. And I think these are, I think Lael used the term experiment. I think these are wonderful experiments. We're learning from these experiments. Let's not smush everybody together. Let's come up with some agile structures that allow these organizations to do what they do well, but when we need to mobilize them all and point them in the same direction, let's create the management structures to do it.
I think Jim is right in what he said. For those of you that don't know, the MCC board is composed of a vast, pretty comprehensive collection of representatives from the U.S. government on an interagency basis. The Secretary of State is my chairman. My vice chairman is the Secretary of the Treasury. I'm the CEO. The U.S. Trade Rep is on the board. U.S. Aid Representative is on the board. And we also have 4 non-government members. Alan Patrikoff, who's a private businessman in New York. Lauren Craner, who's a well-known Washington figure, the head of IRI. Ken Hackett, who's the head of Catholic Relief Services. We have 1 empty post at the moment, which will hopefully get filled before our September board meeting. We meet each other regularly. We sit in on meetings together. We coordinate our activities. The efforts that were begun by Randy Tobias at F, which Henrietta has assumed, are all moving in the right direction. Is it good enough? Is it the way it should be going? Yes, but it needs to be better. We need to coordinate our activities better. We need to share more. We need to cooperate more. It goes back to being on the verge of these partnerships, not only internally amongst government organizations, but in terms of non-government organizations. We have to find a way, and I don't have the answer to it, although we've all given thought to it, of a way of making this work better, not only amongst ourselves, where we share information, we're fully aware of what we're doing, but in a more cooperative, more complementary way within the government and outside of the government.
I got 2 more from the audience. This one's very related. With so many different measures out there for success and development, do you all share, do each of your organizations share a common set of strategic goals, not at the country level in terms of coordination, but do you share a sort of common mission statement? And if so, how do you develop it, and how do you communicate with each other about how you're doing achieving it?